Today's speaker in the LBS Innovation Series is Christine Christian, Chairman of Kirkwood Capital, a Director of Fraxi Group Limited, ME Bank Limited, Lonsec Financial Group, Victorian Management Insurance Authority, and New York-based Powerlinks Inc. Christine talks to us today on the topic of the critical factors that determine why startups either succeed or fail. Christine draws on her vast corporate and philanthropic background to explore what has been the success factors for new startups in her experience. Christine discussed key elements such as the skills you must develop to succeed, the importance of timing, the strength of the idea, funding for success, and the execution for startups. Christine presents from her perspective as a co-investor in startups over the last 5 years, where she has made 11 startup investments. She was interested to know why 9 out of 10 startups fail, and with some co-investors, commissioned research using Dun & Bradstreet data to do regression analysis on what drives success in startups. What is the biggest predictor of likely success among the common elements? That is, strength of the idea, timing, leadership, strength of the team, amount of working capital, execution or marketing. Her answer might surprise you. Christine presents statistical evidence that it is timing that is the biggest predictor of startup success, although all the other elements remain important. That is, to attract investors, startups need to bring something different to a market at a moment in time that is attractive and accessible to consumers and can be enabled by smart technology. So it's all about timing. Please enjoy Christine's presentation.
So I'll call upon you to welcome Christine.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for inviting me to present today. And I do note that this slot straight after lunch can be challenging, so I promise to try and not put anyone to sleep. So I don't have any PowerPoint slides at all, so it's going to be a challenge all round. But I want to say from the outset how really excited I am about being here today for 2 reasons. Firstly, I joined the La Trobe University Council earlier this year. As a new member, I'm one of 2 members of the council that represent sort of business in inverted commas, so we're the 2 sort of commercial agitators on the council. And I really believe in the La Trobe University's Business School's ambition, and secondly, and I really do believe in the ambitious plans that the business school has. I really think that the timing for this is just absolutely perfect. And secondly, I'm personally very committed to the startup organisation as an entity and its multiplier effect on our economy. So much so that earlier this year I led an initiative called Start Space at the State Library, the first of its kind in Australia, and all going to plan will be open for business in early 2019. This was driven very much by research from Boston's Bentley University that revealed that 66% of people aged under 29 wanted to work for themselves and not for some faceless company. And so, you know, things, I mean, you've been hearing about this, you know, for the last couple of days, and we'll continue to hear it probably for the remainder of this session. Things are, you know, the world has moved on. Things are different today. And other than the board roles that have been outlined, I'd say, you know, if I had to put sort of a word on it, I'd say that my day job is as a co-investor in a number of startups here in Australia. I've invested in 11 different startups over the past 4 or 5 years. I'm also co-founder and director of a startup in New York, which takes me there each quarter or so. But the most successful startup that was the establishment of the Consumer Credit Bureau that we founded and started, which was sold to a US multinational several years ago for $250 million. I've also just returned from Berlin, and spent some time there, and it was just so exciting. And I just found that the environment there that has been created by the government is just so ripe for amazing success. And I won't go into all of the attributes there, but you know, we're really we're working in exciting times. So anyway, back to the topic of my small little presentation here. I suppose the question is, but you know, if the startup organisation is so great, why do 9.26% out of every 10 fail? And that's what we wanted to find out as a group of investors here in Australia. We wanted to find out, you know, what actually matters, and we needed it to be statistically driven, that is, removing instinct and myth and anecdotal information from what is it that really, you know, drives success. And because essentially startups are full of promise and excitement, we all know that, but the flip side is they're also full of risk and uncertainty. And there are a lot of great ideas out there that somehow never get off the ground, and conversely there are plenty of questionable ones that become massive successes. So why is that? So, and before, and just to put it into context, and it's already been established, but before my startup and investment career, I was CEO of Dun & Bradstreet. In fact, I've got a former colleague sitting in the room today, so it's a very, very small world. And it was a company that many of you would well know as a credit ratings agency, amongst other things. Its core function is identifying credit risk and identifying or undertaking post-mortems on failed companies. You know, very structured company, establishment company, founded in New York in 1841, uses analysis and very clear about that. So you could say that these two worlds are polar opposites. The startup world brimming with, you know, starry-eyed optimism and full of individuals and investors talking themselves and each other as to why they should invest, and I've heard some incredible stories. And then my other former world, where we went to great depths to identify all the signs of business failure and risk. So some call me in my circle the balanced scorecard of the startup sector, or others have called me the wet blanket. I work with a number of private equity operators and VCs who, you know, I find they, you know, call me in to find out what they've missed. So they've had a pitch, they've been pitched by a startup, a founder with a really great idea. They want more than anything to invest in the business. And they'll almost to the point of talk themselves into it. But every now and then they have a hunch. And so the model that we've created is deployed so that we can sort of work through some of those attributes. That then led us to sponsor a piece of work to understand via an evidence-based approach, and using, in fact, Dun & Bradstreet data to do some regression analysis as to what factors actually matter the most for startup success, and equally importantly, what were the key drivers of failure. We then rated each company against the criteria, and we finally tried to find, in fact we did find the statistical trends which would indicate which of the essential elements was the most likely to predict future success, and which of the elements was the key components differentiating success from failure. So not very different to a D&B score, if you like, a risk score, but overlaying it on a very different ecosystem. It was the first piece of work of this kind done in Australia. There's been a lot of other work done in this area, particularly in the US, and what we found surprised us in that we thought that the ecosystem here was different enough from the US that we would be able to, you know, we would uncover some points of differentiation that were relevant to this particular market, but not so. In fact, it's the factors are fairly similar, it's just we operate in a very different environment. We believed, or at least predicted, that things like the quality of the idea and the successful funding a successful funding would predict success. But what we found instead, and this is similar to some work that has also emerged more recently in Denmark, what we found instead was that far and away the biggest predictor of success was identified as timing. And before going any further, I just want to note one important thing. Innovation or the unique proposition is important. It is really important. I don't want to underplay that, but timing trumps it each time. And I want to highlight why this concept of timing is so important. To me, success driven by timing means that you are offering something different at a moment in time that is attractive to a customer, that is accessible to them as well. So it's about attractive, accessible, and viable in terms of from the perspective of an investor, or viable in terms of managing the business. So essentially there's sort of three areas, and if you had to do sort of a weighted sort of average, you would pick timing every time. And there's lots and lots of examples of that prove that point. So it needs to be right. In the first instance, in that particular moment in time, the question really is that the customer can gain enough value in the offering or the idea to be able to use it and to start generating revenue, as opposed to a notion. And this includes a number of aspects, such as it being easy to use, it's affordable, it's accessible, and it delivers on the promise. It has a track record. It's delivering value, in other words. So there's no point putting forward a really great idea which the founder believes is really wonderful, but if you can't sell it, if you can't generate any revenue from it, then it's just still a great idea. Then there's feasibility, and is the currently available technology at the time able to deliver a good experience? For example, is broadband internet speed high enough to finally deliver on the service? So again, it's all about timing, and there are examples in the past of some great ideas, but because the technology wasn't there to deliver at the time, again, it was just an idea. And then thirdly, viability, and that is, can the startup or the company make a business model which sustains itself from the offering, or add enough additional value in other ways to make it worth offsetting the costs? For example, is there a profit margin with a large enough market in the offering to make investing in it worthwhile? So that goes back to the old, the old-fashioned business case modelling, ensuring, the old sort of boring stuff, but it is absolutely vital, because again, we've seen a lot of great ideas that disintegrate in a couple of years because there's just the business model just can't sustain it. And so the other point on that is that when you think about the timing, you may find that the idea has all of those combinations, but it may just be a little bit early. So again, it's sort of where timing sort of falls into it as well. So we've actually seen some startups which means that they've just put it on ice for a year or so until they can get everything back in order, and then they reintroduce it into the market under a different label. And so when startups say the timing was right, it often just means that finally a moment came where all three of the aspects were finally working together. So when we're looking at any innovation project, we ask ourselves whether it really meets all three aspects of these particular factors. And if it does, then the timing may well be right for it to succeed. So, really for me, the critical factor is it the right time? Is it financially viable? Can you establish a business model that meets the demands of the investor and of the business itself? So, and from a competitive perspective, it's led to, and I'll just give you one example, led to many businesses to prominence despite a chaotic and very business and a very busy market at their time of entry. One example is YouTube. When that came on the scene, for example, there were already dozens of video streaming platforms, but because YouTube launched at a particularly critical moment, after high-speed internet became the norm, but before any other streaming service had risen to prominence, it enjoyed its radical success. So, again, you know, it confirms that. The Consumer Bureau that I was referring to earlier, that I was a part of the co-founding team, was launched just before the crazy days of credit being so readily available. And so, you know, we just launched it in the heady days, just when, you know, everyone but anyone had 3 or 4 credit cards, when businesses such as, you know, buy now, pay later were coming into play. So again, you know, that was timing. And then there are a number of other factors, you know, the idea, the strength of the idea, the leadership. You know, leadership is important in startups. You know, leaders make the decisions, set the vision and inspire people to work harder. I've always said you can put an incompetent leader in place and, you know, with a really great idea, but on the other hand, a very experienced leader can turn even a weak idea into a successful one. So, you know, ideas in themselves certainly don't propel success. The team, you know, entrepreneurs are important, but they rarely accomplish great things alone. They're usually smart enough, or the ones that do succeed are smart enough to employ a lot of really good people around them. In fact, if you look at some of the statistics or some of the research that we did, and we looked at the team that surrounds a successful startup, without not even one exception, those that succeeded had a combination of people who had come out of a corporate background that understood the disciplines, financial disciplines, that understood the importance of having a solid business model, as well as those that had ideas. So, you know, it goes back to the team. Working capital is important. So are sort of early stages of funding. I would say to an investor, you know, don't panic if you can't find the funding immediately. I know from my own experience that there is currently more available capital out there looking for an investment than there are places to invest. Without question. Often what the VCs will say when they say, look, it's too early to invest at this point, or provide an excuse, it's generally because they have not been convinced that the idea is feasible. So there is a lot of capital out there. Obviously the plan has to involve more than just the core idea. Execution, I think, is everything. You know, that being said, a plan is only as valuable as its ability to execute, and again, it's all about sort of that disciplined execution. You can have a great plan, but you can botch it up with poor execution. You know, marketing, obviously, of the idea, an inferior product that's branded in a more appealing, exciting and unique way will always outsell its superior product that happens to have plain, non-memorable positioning and branding. You know, this point may seem superfluous, but it critically affects customers' buying intentions. And then finally, growth. The path that is chosen toward growth plays a significant role in how the startup ends up. You know, grow too fast and the startup will stretch itself thin, grow too slowly and it'll never get anywhere. So again, it's all about that sort of balance. And so, you know, my sort of final sort of words on that is that each of these factors need to be looked at objectively, and that not one factor in itself and you know, I may be just sort of stating the obvious, but the deep research that we found and the statistical evidence that drives many of the decisions that are currently being made by VCs and indeed private equity when it's taken, when the startup has sort of evolved a bit further, is now a sort of a key factor in the decision-making process. So, thank you.
Let's call for a few quick questions. Anything that's bubbling away has to be answered now. What about, I just had one myself about the timing. What are the elements, like we know the team is important, and so you know you tick off all the attributes of the team when you're going through a startup. So what are the aspects of timing that people doing a startup should be aware? What are the,
Look,
how do you know timing other than looking backwards?
Yeah, I think it's just about being brutally honest with oneself about whether all of those factors are indeed in play. So there's no point pursuing something when the market is not ready to buy it, as an example, or it's not accessible. So it's just about being honest and being practical and objective about whether this thing is going to fly or not. Look, you know, I'm sure we've all met with, you know, startup entrepreneurs who so believe in what they're doing. They so believe in the idea. And they think the idea is just sort of cut through everything, but it doesn't, because there are bigger forces at play. You've got to sell it to somebody. You've got to be able to, you know, it's got to be viable. So that's what we mean about timing. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you.